After the 2000 presidential election in the United States, there were, and still are, a great many people that believe corruption was present, that there was voter fraud, and that the election was stolen. Now, real quick, this video is not going to be a platform to rehash all of that. The point is, that system, whatever it was, flawed or not, corrupt or not, was ours to use and decide. And we went forward with the decision as it stood. There was no standing for any other government, the UN, anyone, to come in and put their 2 cents worth in. Period. The same thing could be said for the 2016 election. There were people that, even to this day, still want to rehash this. This video is not going to be any defense of one side or the other, or any belief of this, that, or the other. I will go ahead and acknowledge that there guaranteed was corruption and voter fraud in both electoral cycles. The point is, if the aggrieved parties, the ones who lost, in either of those two events, had gone to a foreign government and said, because, like the Chinese, for example, we believe there is corruption and or fraud, or the system that is in place is not free or fair, would you please, through force of arms, attempt to enter our country and overthrow the government? That would, by definition, be sedition. There is no better, clearer definition of sedition than any utterance or action that promotes a violent overthrow of a government. Even though I believe Washington, D.C., and the RNC and DNC are hopelessly broken and no solution can be found there, my solution is not to even give them credibility enough to make such a statement. I have made the allegation, make them irrelevant. Govern yourselves as 50 states. They have a problem with it, then it's up to them and incumbent upon them to make the first action of violence, and at that point, it's not sedition. You'll never hear me one time ever say, pick up arms and go do this, or go be violent and do that. Now, why did I lead the first 3 minutes with that? The situation in Venezuela is going to change again, and I want my audience to be ahead of it. This random guy named Juan that has never stood for an election, that no one has ever voted for, who was prohibited from leaving the country because of his seditious activities, is now saying that he's going to return to Venezuela. He will more than likely be arrested. The government of Venezuela will have every justification in the world for doing it because he committed treason and sedition by definition. He went to another government, the United States. He has stated that there is no option off the table, which is a tacit threat of military activity. He attempted by force to do something against the will of his government. He's more than likely going to be arrested. Now, I have said this before. They are not going to call this a righteous arrest, meaning DC. They are going to say that it is a kidnapping of a foreign leader by a criminal element. And they are going to say, we're not going to invade Venezuela now based on regime change. We are going to put a rescue team in to rescue a kidnapped foreign leader by a government we don't recognize. And that's how they're going to weasel out of the idea that they're saying, well, we don't want military intervention and we don't, we want a broad coalition and they're going to make themselves out to be the victims. This is how they're going to play that game. I alluded to it in another video. This man has committed a crime against his country, and he needs to stand for justice. He needs to stand and answer for those crimes. It doesn't matter what your opinion is of the 2000 election in this country or the 2016 election in this country. If you went to a foreign government and you attempted to bring them into this country to overthrow our government, you are guilty of sedition, treason, and should face the penalty for it. It doesn't matter what other governments believe. One of the base fundamental beliefs, I'm not a huge fan of the UN, but is sovereignty of nations. And it was only after January of this year, January, I believe, 10th, 11th, that the Washington, D.C., started referring to Nicolas Maduro not as President Maduro, as the criminal regime, and this random guy named Juan is now who we recognize as president. No election has taken place to make this man confirmed as president, and the part of their constitution that he is attempting to use to make himself president proves the point. It is an internal Venezuelan matter. The leadership of countries, who they choose as their leader, is not the place of the UN, and the UN has even said it. This article right here from Sputnik, and I know it's Russian, is from 2 days prior to the failed humanitarian aid effort of last weekend. And they nailed it. They said DC's allies are going to soon regret that they embraced this guy. And the foreign minister of Venezuela is doing something that I think is remarkable. He is delineating the difference between the people of our country, America, and our government. He is petitioning us as people to stand up and speak against this criminal activity by our government. He's not broad brushing and throwing us all in the same basket. He knows that there are a great many people in this country that do not approve of or ascribe to the values of DC. This is why they're attempting to, and this is recent from today, they want this regime change coalition on Venezuela because they realize, meaning DC, realize that they can't do it on their own. They don't have enough credibility to do it. And it's crumbling. This idea of regime change is crumbling already. Colombia is already coming out and saying this will never work. Random guy named Juan's days are numbered, both figuratively and specifically. People who commit these kinds of crimes against their country do not deserve freedom. You can either live in exile, but if you go back to your country, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Now, oddly enough, the Constitution of Venezuela doesn't allow for that. It only allows for, I think, a maximum penalty of 30 years and no death penalty. So, he's in a tough spot. That collapse last weekend, that total fiasco on the border, is going to have ripple effects. There are all sorts of questions now about even the Colombian Congress is divided over this. And this is as close of an ally DC has in South America, Colombia. No closer. And they, even now, are split. But the game that's going to be played by Washington, D.C., I'm going to reiterate this again. They are going to change the narrative. They are going to say, we are not invading Venezuela to change the regime. The illegal criminals, Maduro and his horrible, evil, socialist dictator people, they kidnapped a foreign leader And we have to rescue that foreign leader. He's who we recognize as the president of Venezuela. That's going to be the excuse they use to put boots on the ground. And they're going to attempt to go to the UN and go to all of these other countries in South America, Latin America, and say, you need to support us in this because, well, gosh, I mean, if your president gets kidnapped, I mean, don't you want the U.S. to come run into the rescue? If you don't support us here, maybe we don't help you out then. That's the game they're going to play. The man committed treason. He committed sedition. By definition, he called for the violent overthrow of a duly elected government. It was not rigged. The reason it wasn't rigged, how can I say that? Hugo Chavez won 60% of the vote in 1998 as a third-party candidate. The last election he stood for, before he passed away in 2012, he won 60% of the vote. Zero things changed regarding the direction of Venezuela or the belief system of the people from 1998 to 2013. Then when Nicolas Maduro stood for an election, he won, but he won by a much more narrow margin. Because there was an attempt by Washington, D.C. to affect and screw with that election. If he truly were the dictator that everyone believes he is, everyone in D.C. and all these people who disagree with me, why would he have only had the election results showing him winning by 1.5%? If he were truly the evil, terrible, horrible socialist dictator, he would have shown him winning going away. 60, 70, 80%. That's what dictators do. But that wasn't the case in 2013. And that's why he has stood and been recognized as the leader and the president of Venezuela all the way up until 2019. That's why the U.S. couldn't do anything until January 10th. They could only say that the election last summer was illegitimate because their guys didn't participate. And the U.S., even though it was asked to, did not go and observe. But the UN did. In fact, the opposition, these whiny little crybabies, asked and begged the UN not to observe those elections. To not even garner an opinion. Think of that for a minute. Why would they not have wanted that? Because it would have revealed that the election system was exactly the same one that elected the Chavistas into power, whether you agree with them or not. Whether I agree with them, whether anybody in America, North America agrees with them, is irrelevant. I'm not saying we should be Chavista here in North America. Not my place to. I think the people of Texas should have their system. The people of Oregon should have theirs. The people of Rhode Island should have theirs. And I'll bet, left to our own devices, we could probably figure out how to get along. One of the dirty little secrets about the revolution is we won it in 1776, but we didn't have a constitution until 1789. Why did it take that long? Why did it take 13 years? Because primarily the southern states didn't want to be part of some conglomeration like that. They knew it wasn't in their best interest to be. It was Washington, D.C. that was going to the states and begging them to come be part of the union, not the other way around. It's a provisional thing. And states have the ability and the constitutional right and authority to say, nope, sorry, not part of that union anymore. And we don't need to ask permission of Washington, D.C. to do it. We don't need to go through all these rigmarole things and, make these conventions and, and say this is the legal way we're doing it. No, we're just done. And if you want my humble opinion on how to effect that change, start in your zip code, and then move to your city, and then move to the county, and start it there in your own areas. It's not my place to tell any other locality how they should go about regaining their independence. It's going to be very different for each individual place around this country. But it's possible. You just have to pay no attention to the man behind the curtain in Washington, D.C., because they are a paper tiger. They are not going to intervene militarily in any U.S. state attempting to leave the Union. They'll talk big shit just like they are now with Venezuela. Venezuela is leading the way. They are showing us how to do it. And it's not going to be easy. In fact, it's going to be damn hard. And you're not going to get a lot of likes on Facebook for doing it. But if you believe in it, and it's righteous, do it. And start in your own neighborhoods. Like, share, subscribe.